Okay. Good afternoon, guten Tag, privet, здравствуйте, konnichiwa, and welcome to Thinking Recklessly with me, Nicholas Henshelwood. This is the inaugural episode of Thinking Recklessly, the show where we think recklessly and try desperately hard to articulate what we're thinking effectively enough for it to be valuable to others. But the we is a little bit more royal on this, the first episode of the show, as obviously it is just me for the time being. Yeah, so this podcast is kind of going to be an exercise in expectation management. I don't really have a particular expectation for the way that this podcast goes, excuse me. I just want to have a place to discuss topics that are close to me, that I am knowledgeable about, and to overanalyze from the mundane to the bizarre, and to overanalyze things for the general public. For those of you who are unfamiliar with me, my name is Nicholas Henshelwood. I am a matric at Redham House Constantia in Cape Town, South Africa. Things I'm passionate about: theology, philosophy, and linguistics. Linguistics is my chosen field of study for next year, with luck, and hopefully to make a sort of career out of. I've been studying languages for about 4 years now, starting with French, then German, then Italian. I have experience in a whole bunch of little Eastern European languages. Not that I speak them, just that I've studied the grammar, looked at how they evolved, etymologically speaking. And currently I run a little polyglot society within Redham House. So yeah, I'm currently studying German, Russian, and Latin. So yeah, you could say that languages are sort of my niche and my baby. But I also have a particular passion for philosophy and theology. So I am a practicing Jew theologically. I am undergoing the conversion process, or not necessarily the process yet, but I've been living a Jewish lifestyle since the beginning of last year. So yeah, that's sort of my religious standpoint. And philosophically speaking, I am very interested in leftist philosophy, that of Marx, Engels, and someone I want to talk about today, Slavoj or Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian-born philosopher and cultural critic. He's kind of my muse at the moment, philosophically speaking. And I want to talk about a thought experiment that I have been thinking of for a little while, that was triggered by something I saw either online or somewhere. I might have picked it up. Someone might have made a joke, and I just went from there. And for the life of me, I can't remember where it was from. Okay, so let's kick off. Let's kick off with this little thought experiment. So obviously it is just me today, and I am trying my level best to get the audio as best as I can, as high quality as I can. I don't really have a mic at the moment, and I'm recording out of my wardrobe so that it's nice and quiet and the acoustics are good, and it certainly sounds from my ears like the acoustics are okay, at the very least. So let's talk about Žižek to start with. So he has been dubbed the most dangerous philosopher in the Western world. That was by Vice, I think. He focuses on the reconsideration of the German ideologies, that of Kant, Schelling, and Hegel. He has reinvigorated the challenging psychoanalytic theory of Jacques Lacan. And he is famously a critic and an adapter, shall we say, of Marxist philosophy. And his work is incredibly interesting to me because not only is he a philosopher, but he is an out-and-out cultural critic, which is just as important. Because even though my knowledge of philosophy is probably more equivalent to that of a pinhead than a library, one thing that I have picked up is that the most effective philosophical angles are those that are taken from a cultural standpoint and not just a philosophical, economic, and social standpoint. So let's look into his background just to get some context. So Žižek is Slovenian born, and he was born, within the former Soviet Union, and he is probably what he's most famous for is his work speaking about Marx. He is fundamentally leftist. He has self-published 2 short films. I think there's The Pervert's Guide to Cinema and The Pervert's Guide to Philosophy. Both of these I need to find first so that I can read them. At the moment, I've just been looking at his talks, and it's very interesting to me getting back into proper philosophy, being able to look at philosophers and listen to what they have to say, and remember that in order to respect the work of a particular philosopher, it's not ideal to agree with everything the philosopher is saying, because what we have to remember is that, philosophers by their very nature are there to challenge the opinions of the consumers, or those who read into their philosophy, those who follow their philosophy, those who are interested. And he made a very interesting point on gender identity the other day that I thought was incredibly interesting. This was a talk on YouTube. I would link it in the description, but I don't know how many times I'm going to cite his work directly. So just Google it, Slavoj Žižek on gender identity. And the way that he looked at gender identity, and this is kind of good to kick off with, the way he looks at gender identity is that, as far as I can understand, he believes that the human race is born with a sex, whether that be male, female, or neither. Maybe there are physical attributes to the person's sex that are not able to be categorized under male or female. Although he didn't integrate that heavily into his point. And then we speak about the gender, which is the hot topic at the moment. Not necessarily the hot topic, because that sort of belittles it almost. He talks about gender, the psychological expression of one's gender identity. And his theory, and the way that I interpreted it, was that gender is, strictly speaking, a product of society. This we know. But the way he looked at it is that it's a product of materialist society. And I think stemming off from that, if I think about, the 20th century, which is a period of history that I enjoy studying the most, from the 50s onwards, the latter half of the 20th century, and we look at the post-war economic boom, and we look at clothing, we look at children's clothing, children's materialism, children's consumerism, we then start to see the sort of later roots of modern consumerist and materialistic gender if we look at the idea of the classic example, anyone who has grown up with McDonald's, you get a Happy Meal, they ask, do you want a boy toy or a girl toy? So we look at those characteristics of these toys, and we look at, okay, so the boy toys, let's start with the color palettes. Okay, we've got cold colors, we've got your blues, greens, darker colors, grays, blacks. Girl toys, you've got the inverse. We've got pink, purple, red, more pastel colors, lighter colors. And I remember listening to, I think you could have been a teacher of mine ages ago, speak about psychologically trying to back up this generalized color preference among men and women. Speaking about how when the human race were hunter-gatherers, they had hardwired roles within their communities, and the teacher explained that women naturally gravitate towards pinks, purples, and reds because they are the colors of fruits. And as women were at that point predominantly gatherers, gathering berries, tubers, vegetable matter to eat and to produce goods from, that was apparently the hardwired psychological reason for women liking pink and colors like that. But then I couldn't help but think, okay, so if we think about the hunter-gatherer society within Southern Africa, we think about the Khoisan, we think about, we even think about later tribes, Zulu tribes, Xhosa tribes. Okay, fair. The gatherers are going to look for berries like that, that are maybe of this color palette. But, okay, so this hypothesis then looks at the idea of men being hunters. So what are men hunting that is blue? Or what are men hunting that is green or gray? All right, so I mean, green we see in nature as trees, bushes, whatever. Blue, water. Where are the browns? For hunting springbok, antelope. Where is that? So that was maybe a very poorly thought through 5 second throwaway. Excuse me, 5 second throwaway. Explanation on why gender stereotypes exist. And this came to mind today because obviously this is a recorded show, obviously only audio, so you can't see me, probably for better or for worse, but I was wearing a short skirt and red lipstick today for my online classes, and almost as if it was planned, we spoke about gender in a class of mine, and how do we present gender to modern people growing up, maybe from 14 to 16? How do we present the differences between sex and gender? How do we present that? Because on the one hand, we can't discount the importance of sex, the importance of the biological attributes of men and women. So, we can't dismiss that, but we also, probably even more dangerously, we can't dismiss the importance of the acknowledgement of the psychological aspect of that, which is gender. So what I added to the conversation was that in actual fact, gender, as opposed to sex is something you can't really run away from. Whereas gender means as much to the person who holds it as they want it to. So what do I mean by that? Well, put it this way. I am very comfortable in my identification, self-identification as a man. I use he, him pronouns, and probably 6 out of 7 days a week, I look fairly masculine. But as I explained, putting a skirt and lipstick on for that 1 day out of 7 does not make me any less of a man. Having a feminine self-expression does not make me less of a man. And what we have to look at is that self-expression and the fact that the way that we group self-expression into traditionally masculine and traditionally feminine, that circles right back to materialist and consumerist based gender identity, because it was, after all, a trend for, or not necessarily a trend, but a societal norm for women to wear dresses, for men to wear pants, for men to bear arms, and for women to bear children. And after a while, society adapted to this, and society within the 20th and 21st century almost falls hand in hand with consumerism. And what do we sell to men and women? How do we target men and women differently? So that was our conversation on gender, and I can't draw a particular conclusion. After all, I am thinking recklessly. I'm pretty much putting thoughts into the air right now, trying to look at things from my side, and my goal is maybe to excite the person listening, and to maybe get some sort of feedback, some sort of comment, some sort of reaction, and maybe touch on it in the next episode. But earlier on I mentioned a thought experiment, and by this I mean a sort of prompt that I thought about the other day. And it's interesting to explore different aspects of this. And I do have someone in mind who I would like to have on the show to speak about this with me, because obviously I can only analyze from my point of view with no real qualification. I don't have any credibility for my opinions. They are just opinions, and the way that I choose to think about this particular issue. So let's for a moment imagine that we are a global village. We are a monogamous society. By monogamous, I don't mean racially monogamous. I mean we are run by one group, one person. And that group or person or central constitution, that central value system suddenly accumulates the right to reclassify human beings, to reclassify Homo sapiens as a different species. And the power that they would have over the population if they were to do so. So if we look at the International Bill of Rights, that applies exclusively to human beings. So our Bill of Rights applies to human beings exclusively. So if this central group and this central value system reclassifies Homo sapiens as, say, mice, and even though their human forms and human behavior do not change, they then live in a world where they are classified by the people who have power over them as mice. What does that mean for these people? So obviously looking at it head on, we can look at this as sort of this is clearly an authoritarian philosophy. The idea that the people on the top want to dehumanize the people on the bottom so that they can have better control, which is fair enough, because as soon as these people are reclassified as a species, quote unquote, below Homo sapiens, then the immediate assumption is that they would not have the same rights. And the freedoms that they enjoyed as Homo sapiens, as human beings, would be removed. So then we think, okay, so we go from human rights to animal rights. And what animal rights actually exist? And this is by no means a vegetarianism, veganism debate here. This is not that sort of not that argument. But these people now exist on the plane of a species that is below, and the rights that they now have to follow are no longer those of humans. So once again, the question is, what rights do they now have? Is the right to existence still applicable? Because as we know, and this is no longer really philosophically speaking, this is logically speaking, mice are killed all the time. Mice are vermin. We sort of kill them. So, does that mean that now these people are now open to being killed by the people more powerful than them? Does it mean that does it also mean that that human beings now enjoy the same freedoms as mice, that they can run around naked, steal, scavenge? So, we look at this, and this is why I think it's such an interesting thought experiment, because you can look at it from the physical point of view, from the fact that the human beings in actual fact don't change. So we shouldn't think of them as mice, but only pseudo-mice, which sounds so pretentiously, pseudo-intellectual. But we could also look at what advantages the people in power have. Okay. The fact that they no longer have to look after the rights of this population, that health is no longer an issue because mice do not have the same lifespan. The fact that they are fully within their rights to murder them because they are considered a pest. Okay, so now we look at this power dynamic in which this group is almost completely lawless and follow the behavioral patterns of mice, of rodents, but are governed by an authoritarian body, in which the final punishment, indeed the only punishment, is death. So maybe that's thought-provoking. Maybe you've lost me. But again, this is after all the first episode. I have sort of just jumped in here. So leave comments. I want to know your take. And please don't for a minute think that this is how all of my episodes are going to go, where we're going to jump in to major philosophy, and major high-level philosophy, and talking about philosophers and etc. This is just something that I've been thinking about. So it is unfortunately fascist. Next week I could come on and say, oh, I've been thinking about Latin grammar, and guess what? We're talking about Latin grammar. You're just strapped on for the ride, sweetie. So in a lot of ways, I am the authoritarian body and you are the mice. How does this relate to Žižek? Okay. Žižek talks about the struggle with power that human beings have ever since birth. When a human being is born, they deal with the power struggle between them and their parents. And until they are old enough, they deal with that power struggle. That the law of the land in which they live does not necessarily apply to them, in that the, dare I say, normal child is not governed by, say, the highway code, because they are not driving. The normal child is not governed by anything probably besides the Bill of Rights, because it is arguable, but it can be said that that children and young people have probably more to worry about than crime and than misdemeanor. That is not saying that children's morality is flawless. It's just saying that the average child does not have access to weapons or drugs or instruments to escape that morality. So we look at the power struggle between them and their parents. The fact that the morality bestowed upon children by their parents becomes, in those 18 years, more important than the morality of the land in which they live and the morality and societal pressures of the world at large. Then come 18, or 18 in South Africa and most of the Western world, in which the child legally, or the minor legally, then supersedes that particular title and moves on to the adult title. Obviously, this transition is different in many cultures. Speaking rabbinically, we can look at the fact that in Judaism, we acknowledge the fact that boys and girls reach adulthood at, 12 and 13, which corresponds to the beginning of puberty, the menstrual age for females, and the beginning of, shall we say, physical desire for men. And in Judaism, as soon as you become an adult after your bar or bat mitzvah, you are met with that new sense of responsibility. And once you surpass that hurdle, and once you are, in effect, well within that new set of responsibility, whether it be federal law or local law, we look at that power struggle and we look at the trust that one has to put in one's constitution and in one's leaders. And in, let's face it, the potential futility of one's leaders and one's rulers, those who pretty much govern societal norms. And that brings us back to the mouse thought experiment. All right. So yes, you could say that there are protections in place for people, in terms of the fact that their rulers cannot just turn around, our rulers cannot just turn around and say, oh, well, you're mice now. Which, yes, is fair enough. But this could also be used as a metaphor for, say, fascism. And there is, as we've seen in the United States over the past 4 years, and yes, I am very left-wing, that I will put on the table, we have experienced a level of cult of personality fascism, in my opinion. This is not to say that the political system that was followed in those 4 years has been overarchingly fascist. That is up for debate, and that is in the hands of the political analysts, the political philosophers, Nancy Pelosi, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, to interpret. But if we look at Trump supporters in relation to, say, Biden supporters, Bernie supporters, Democrats, I don't think that the Democrats, and I know it's difficult to label oneself here, but it is difficult to imagine the Democrats adopting the same cult of personality that the Republicans have done in the presidential race of 2020, which obviously led to the storming of the Capitol building in early 2021. The fact that this was a man, the most powerful man on earth, who drew his followers to commit an act which put national security in danger, that put the very constitution behind which he stands in danger. And so with that sort of power, you have to look at the irony of that. The fact that we have people who stand behind their Second Amendment rights to bear arms and to keep themselves safe. For the argument that they want to keep themselves safe. And then in the same breath, talking about safety, they will then claim that the coronavirus vaccine is fundamentally unsafe, that it is controlled. And they look upon healthcare with a certain level of cynicism. They look upon any sort of social aspect of the government with a level of cynicism. And looking and it is baffling, and it's sort of difficult. It's difficult for me to sit here and spin this web of words and thoughts while trying to figure this out in my head. So it is very interesting to think about these sort of metaphors and these sort of power-based experiments, and to at first think, oh, this is bogus, and this is stupid, or this is childish, and then we look back and we think, well, what's the difference? If we look at people in power classifying people as different, I mean, we've only got to look to the aftermath of colonialism. We've only got to look to the aftermath of apartheid. We've only got to look to, police brutality in America. What gives the people in power in America, the people in charge of the police, what gives those people the right to classify people of color or people in lower income areas? What gives those people the right to classify these people as more dangerous, when the overwhelming statistics show us that if you're looking for, dangerous criminals, there is no racial discrepancy. If anything, there's a discrepancy that favors towards Caucasian males being more dangerous. I mean, if you look at the school shooting epidemic in America, how many of those school shooters have been POC? So I'm going to sort of wrap up soon, but what I'm going to say is, let this open a dialogue in which we can look forward to the Biden administration. We can look forward to our own general election when that time comes, and we can look at power, and we can look at the manipulation, and we can look at how leaders wish to classify us. And in a certain way, although it sounds juvenile, we do need to sort of be wary about being classified as mice, and being classified as lesser, and being classified as sort of less of a priority. That brings me to saying, I hope this first episode hasn't been too hectic. I do plan on being a little bit funnier in the future, but this is, after all, sort of brand new to me, so just bear with me in terms of that. Thank you very much for listening to the first episode. Thank you very much for sitting through it. Once again, I hope you could understand. I hope that I wasn't sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, like spinning a yarn here way too fast for anyone to sort of pick up. Um, so yeah, I hope you can join me again for our next episode of Thinking Recklessly, and hopefully we can have a guest that might make this more double-sided, with some more sort of intellectual conflict. So I'm going to wish you a goodbye. I'm going to say have a good week. Um, and yeah, I just hope that you can continue to think critically, that you can continue to think intellectually and analytically. So until next time, I will see you then.